You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramah Beit Shemesh, Israel, 57/77/2017. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Bo, and we have the wrap-up, we have the completion of the Geula process. We have the last three Makos, the last three plagues, where Hashem brings upon the Egyptians in Egypt in order to cause them to release the Jews, to allow their slaves to go free. And what I'd like to focus in on in our Parsha is not so specifically the specific points within the Parsha, but really I want to understand more generally a number of different points within our Parsha. It's also been going on in last week's Parsha and the previous week's Parsha. One of the questions I'm fond of asking in regards to these Parshas is, why is it that we see that Hashem says, go to Pharaoh, go to Pharaoh, have him let the Jews out of Egypt? You're going to convince him to let the Jews out of Egypt. He's going to be forced in the end to let the Jews out of Egypt. Why is it almost seems like we need to ask permission of Pharaoh, or it seems like we need to go through this process. What is the understanding of this? Why can Hashem just say, I'm taking the Jews out of Egypt, let them walk out, and miraculously they'll be able to get out? Why does it have to be done in this way, where Moshe is asking Pharaoh for permission for the Jewish people to leave? What's the understanding of the depth of that idea? Also, another interesting thing is that we find that in some of the plagues, in some of the Makos, Moshe Rabbeinu uses a staff. Hashem tells him to take this special staff and to use it as part of the Makos, inscribed in the staff. As our Chazal tell us, it said the Tzach Hadash Ba'achav, which stands for the 10 plagues. This staff was an ancient staff. It's going to also in the future be used by Mashiach. But what is the idea of the staff? It's used at the beginning of our Parsha in order to bring about the Makkah of Arbe, of the grasshoppers. What is the idea of it? Why is that necessary to have a staff in order, in some cases, to perform the miracles that Moshe is going to perform? He's going to use it again in next week's Parsha at the Yam Suf in order to perform that miracle of parting of the seas. Why do we need the staff for? It's also very interesting, the relationship of Moshe and Aharon, which we spoke about previously, but I want to explore a little bit more in depth. Moshe and Aharon, they're two brothers. Moshe arrives on the scene here about a year before the actual Geula is going to take place. But if we think about it, Aharon HaKohen, Aaron the priest, who's his brother, he's been with the Jewish people the entire time. Aharon is a few years older than Moshe. Moshe goes off. He has to run away because of what happened in Parsha Shmos, where he killed the Egyptian. But Aharon is there with the Jewish people throughout the time that they're in this very intense, difficult slavery. What is the difference between the role that Moshe plays and the role that Aharon plays? It's also interesting that Aharon is the one that performs the first of the plagues. He performs the first 3 plagues. He's the one who does the miracles. Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aharon. Aharon specifically is the one who speaks to Pharaoh. He's the mouthpiece of Moshe Rabbeinu, as it were. What is the idea? How are we to understand the role of Moshe and the role of Aharon, how they work in tandem, how they work together, and what is their individual roles in the Geula process? So in order to understand this, we need to understand generally, what is the idea of Mashiach, of the Messiah? What is the purpose? What is the role of the Redeemer? What is his job? What does he come to accomplish? And this is something which, God willing, we'll see soon in what's going on in the world today, which is leading up to the final Mashiach, the final redemption. So it's something that we need to understand how we can perceive that in the current events, in the current reality that we find ourselves in. But we find that the Geula of Mitzrayim, the redemption of Egypt, it parallels in many ways the final redemption. But we need to understand, what is the role, what is the concept behind the redemption? What is the message of the redemption? What does Mashiach, the Messiah, in the case of the Geula from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, the Exodus, so Moshe Rabbeinu was the Messiah of that time. But what is his purpose? What is his role? What does he accomplish? And how does he accomplish that? So, in order to understand this, we need to focus for a moment on Yosef HaTzadik, on Joseph. Because Yosef represents one aspect of Mashiach. There's 2 aspects of the Messiah. There's what's referred to as Mashiach ben Yosef, the Messiah who comes, who's an offspring of Joseph, of Yosef HaTzadik, and there's Mashiach ben Dovid. There's the Messiah who comes from King David, who originally comes from Yehuda. And these two people, these two aspects, are both part of the Mashiach process. But in order to understand each of these aspects, we need to look at their forebears. We need to look at the one who is the original Mashiach, the original Messiah. Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph himself, was the original paradigm. He represents for us the job of Mashiach ben Yosef. And if we look at his life and we look at his story, there are certain interesting things that we can understand about Mashiach ben Yosef himself, and which we'll be able to see that in the two individuals of Moshe and Aharon, each of them represent a different aspect of Mashiach. Aharon, in a certain sense, represents Mashiach ben Yosef. We'll see how, but he corresponds to that idea. And Moshe Rabbeinu represents the aspect of Mashiach ben Dovid. So what are these two aspects? What are these two ideas? So let's look for a moment at Yosef. Yosef himself, he has a dream. And in his dream, he has two different dreams. In one of the dreams, he has 11 stars and the sun and the moon bowing down to him. And so we know, as the pasuk tells us, the verses tell us, that it was an allegory for the fact that his 11 brothers and his father and his mother were going to bow down to him. But interestingly, there's a medrash in regards to Yoshua. Joshua, who was the successor of Moshe in leading the Jewish people, he was from the tribe of Ephraim, who was from Yosef, and he was an aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef. And there's a story that's described, that's brought down in Yoshua, in the Sefer Yoshua, in the book of Joshua, where he's in the middle of a battle, and it's Friday afternoon, and they can't continue the battle. They're not going to be able to complete the battle before Shabbos. And Yoshua commands the sun to stand still in the heavens. The sun and the moon, they stand still. So Shabbos does not yet arrive, the sun doesn't set, and they're able to complete the battle and win the battle. Now there's a very interesting medrash that says, I'm going to read it to you inside. It's a Tanchuma. It says like this, Shemesh begivon dom. The verse in Joshua chapter 10 verse 12 says that the sun stood still in the heavens. Bikesh Yoshua l'shatekes achama. Yoshua wanted to cause the sun to be frozen in its place. Amar Hashemesh leYoshua, the sun said to Joshua, Chiyesh katan amar legadol dom. What a small one can say to a great one to stand still. Ani nevresi barvi. I, the sun, was created on the fourth day of creation. I am older, I am greater. Uvnei adam nivru bashishi. Men were only created on the sixth day. Vata amar li dom. And you're telling me to stand still? Amar leYoshua, so Yoshua said to the sun, Ben chorin shu katan, someone who is a free man, who's a master, even though he's young. V'yesh eved zaken, and he has an elderly slave. Eino amar lo shtok, can the master not say to the older one, who's his slave, to freeze? You are my servant, sheshtachavesa li Yosef. You bow down to Joseph. Shenemar hinei hashemesh v'yarech v'acharas hakochavim mishtachavim li. The verse says that in Joseph's dream, the sun and the moon and the stars were all bowing down. So you, the sun, were bowing down to my great-grandfather. I have every right to tell you to stand still because you bowed down to my great-grandfather Joseph. So what is the idea here of the Medrash? The Medrash seems to be very difficult to understand. But the idea of the Medrash is that Yoshua has the spiritual power of Yosef HaTzadik, of Mashiach ben Yosef. And so he has the right to tell the sun to bow to him, to become subservient to him, to stand still so that he can complete his battle. What is the understanding of this dream? The dream wasn't just, when Yosef had that dream, it wasn't just about that time, but it was also about a future time. It represented the power of Mashiach ben Yosef to cause all of the celestial bodies, all of that which God brings his benevolence into the world through, the sun, the moon, and the stars, they bow down to the tzaddik. They show that who is the one that has the true dominion over the world, who is the true power, who is the true conduit of goodness into the world. It's the one who's the righteous person, the one who's subservient to God, the one who makes himself completely nullified to God. That's the one who truly brings power into the world. The sun has to stand still and show its subservience to Mashiach ben Yosef, has to show that it doesn't give any light or it doesn't set unless the tzaddik wills it to be so. The Mashiach ben Yosef wills it to be so. And this is something that we see In a parallel way, lahavdil, but in a parallel way, it's in Psukim in Yeshaya, in Isaiah, the 60th chapter of Isaiah, which is a beautiful chapter. It's worth seeing. It speaks about what happens when Mashiach comes, when Messiah arrives, and all the world is aware of Hashem. All the world is aware of godliness, but also aware of the significance of the Jewish people as the conduits for that godliness. The chapter starts off, Kumi oiri ki va'orech, rise and shine because your sun has come, your light has come. It's the light of the Jewish people, the light of the Jewish people, which is a reflection of God's light, which is shining into the world. But very beautifully and interestingly, in chapter 60, verse 19 of Isaiah, it says, Lo yelach or hashemesh laor yomam. The sun will no longer be a light in the day. U'lenoga hayoreach lo yoir lach. And the shine of the moon will not be shining for you. Where is the light going to come from? Where's the sustenance going to come from? V'hayolach Hashem laor elam. Hashem himself, God, will be the light forever. V'elokayach l'sifartech. Your God will be your splendor. Verse 20, Lo yovo od shimshech v'irechech lo Yosef. The sun and the moon, they're not going to be around. Ki Hashem yalach laor elam. Hashem will be your light forever. V'sholmu yemei avlech. The mourning period, the time of sadness will be over. So we see that the Kufa of Mashiach, the time period of the Messiah, is a time when it will be clear that Hashem is the power, that the light that we receive, the sustenance that we receive from these celestial bodies is only significant insofar as they are transmitting the light of Hashem. And at the moment when Hashem makes himself reveal, when God reveals himself that he is the root of that power, we won't really need the sun and the moon anymore to give us that light, because Hashem himself will shine that light. The sun and the moon will bow in a certain sense. They will show that they don't have the power, that Hashem is the one who has the power. And in a similar parallel way, lahavdil, they bowed in Yosef's dream to show that Yosef and Mashiach ben Yosef, whose job is to bring Hashem's light into the world, to show that Hashem is the true source of light, the one who brings that recognition into the world. He is the one who is to be bowed to. He is the one who is bringing Hashem's light into the world truly. But ultimately, it's not about him either. It's really about the fact that Hashem is the one who's the source of light, who's the source of all power, who's the source of all sustenance. Now, that's the job of Mashiach ben Yosef, and it's also the job of Mashiach ben Dovid. The job of Mashiach is to show that all power that exists in this world is really God's power. It's nobody else. Nobody else has true power. And there's one more point before we come back to Moshe and Aharon and Pharaoh that I'd like to share with you, and it's an Orach Chaim. It's in Parshas Balak in Bamidbar in Numbers, chapter 24, verse 17. The verse says that in the brachas of Bilam, he's giving the blessings to the Jewish people. He speaks about the fact, Dorach Kochav Miyakov, that there's going to be a star that shines from Jacob, become Shevet Yisrael, and a staff will rise up from the people of Israel. What is the idea of this staff? What is the idea of this star? So the Orach Chaim explains beautifully that there are two different ways or two different parts of how Mashiach comes, of how the Messiah arrives, how Geula occurs. One way is Kam Shevet Yisrael. It's where the staff, the rod, a staff is really a stick. It's a piece of wood. It's a branch that's grown from the ground. It's something that rises up in a natural way, through a natural process. It comes up, it grows out of the ground. And in a parallel way, the Jewish people experienced redemption through a process in a sequential way. One thing after another, and the lashon of the Orach Chaim is kederech hakamim ba'olam, like those things that come up in the world that grow derech teva in a natural way. So there's an aspect of Mashiach, of the Geula, of the redemption, which happens naturally, and that's the aspect, as the Orach Chaim says, of Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef is involved in doing things, bringing about redemption in a way that on the surface seems to be natural. It seems to be in a sequential way. You look at the birth of Israel, the country of Israel in our current times, and it seems like something which is happening naturally. You look at Israel 200 years ago, I've seen accounts of how many Jews were in Jerusalem. In 1812, there were less than 30 Jews in Jerusalem. Today, there's hundreds of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem. And if you look at the growth of the Jewish people within Israel in the last 70 years, in 1948, there were 600,000 Jews. Today, there are 6 million Jews. But this is all part of the Geula process, which is referred to as Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a more natural aspect. But the aspect of Mashiach ben Dovid is the Darach Kochav Miyakov, is that star shining, that star shooting across the sky, which is a miracle, miraculous. Mashiach ben Dovid comes to complete. He comes to finish off the process with miracles and amazing occurrences. Now, let's go back and return to the story in Parshas Bo, the story of the Exodus, which is really the prototype of what Geula looks like, of what redemption looks like. And we'll see that both of these aspects, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben Dovid, are both clearly there. We asked, what is the difference between Aharon and Moshe? We see that Aharon was there throughout the time that the Jews were enslaved through their difficult times. Moshe, on the other hand, only comes at the very end, the last year, and performs the miracles and brings the Jews out of Egypt. But you can see right away that Aharon is there during the process. He is there watching the Jewish people. Even the very difficulty, the slavery itself, is part of the process of redemption. We need to go through the challenges in order to reach the exalted state that we're going to when we receive the Torah. But Aharon is there throughout the process, so he represents the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef. It's also interesting that the first 3 plagues, which involved using the matzah, using the staff, which we're going to get to in a moment, using the staff to strike the earth or strike the water, the earth, the water, those are the places which are the sources of life, which have to do with what we saw in the Orach Chaim, this aspect of the Kamshevet Yisrael, the staff that rises up, the natural growth, the natural procession. So Aharon is the one who performs those original miracles. And Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Dovid, they work together. There's a crossover. Mashiach ben Yosef does the first aspect of the redemption. He's involved in the process part, but he also completes the first parts of the miracles. And that's what we see with Aharon HaKohen. That's what he does. Those are the first miracles that he performs. But Mashiach ben Dovid and Moshe playing that role of Mashiach ben Dovid, he comes in and he is the one who's doing the completion and performing the miracles that even the Chartumei Pharaoh can't perform. Those necromancers, those magicians of Pharaoh, they were not able to do those things. Interestingly, Aaron's miracles, the first 2, they could also do, meaning there's a certain natural ability that someone else may have. Aharon can do that too. Okay, he gets it past that. But Moshe is the one who's going to do the greater miracles because he's the aspect of Mashiach ben Dovid. And we spoke about the fact that the job of Mashiach, his purpose is to cause the lights of the sun and the moon and the stars to go out and prove that the power, the true source of life and sustenance is Hashem, is God. And that's why they need to come, Moshe and Aharon, to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, who represents the power, the one who has dominion over the world. Mitzrayim, Egypt was the greatest power at that time, was the greatest country at that time. The one who seems to have all the power, that's not really, you are not the source of power. It seems like you are the sun, you are the Nile. As Pharaoh says, Ani li yoriv ani asisini, the Nile is mine, I made myself. He seems to be showing or saying that he's the one who has the power. Mashiach's job, Moshe and Aaron's job, is to come and say, you think you have the power? The true source of power is only Hashem. And it's not a coincidence that they use a staff. They use the staff, which is a stick that grew from the ground, which went through the process, received the nourishment ultimately from Hashem, from God, to represent the fact that this is the Mata Elokim, this is the connection which is connected in, which is sourced in God. These miracles don't happen because I do these miracles. These miracles happen because I hold the staff of Hashem, because I'm connected to God. A staff or a branch is just a piece of a tree. It's a piece of something greater. It's connected. And Moshe and Aharon were showing that we are not separate. We don't have our own power, but rather all the power truly comes from God. They, in a certain sense, were showing the sun and the moon. We might even be suns and moons and stars, but we bow. We extinguish our light and show that Hashem is the one who has the true light. And that's what they were coming to do to Pharaoh. That's what they were coming to say to Pharaoh. And that's the point of redemption. That's the role of the Redeemer, and that's the role of redemption, is to show that all the power ultimately, truly, comes from Hashem. So that's why it was necessary for them to come to Pharaoh, ask him permission, so to speak, because it wasn't just about the Jews walking out and miraculously leaving. It was about showing where the real power comes from and causing that which seems to have the power. In this case, it's Pharaoh. In the case of the verse in Isaiah, it's the sun and the moon. It's causing them to bow. It's causing them to relinquish their light and to admit that it's Hashem who has the true power, who has the true light, and seeing that that's the true source of sustenance and light. I want to bless you, and please bless me back. Hashem should help us be able to live to see the days of Mashiach, whether it's Mashiach ben Yosef or Mashiach ben Dovid. Recognize that we're living in amazing times where Hashem is bringing about the redemption, seemingly in a natural way, but ultimately coming to show us that He is the source of all power. Hashem should help us recognize in our personal lives, on a personal level, on a national level, that Hashem is the one who's the source of all that is good in the world. And may we all merit to see the coming of Mashiach, who will prove to the entire world that Hashem indeed is the only power. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.